It was faint, but it was right on the other side of the door. Slow and steady, like someone standing there, waiting, trying not to move. I froze with my hand inches from the lock. I didn't know how long the breathing had been there. I didn't know if the person knew I was listening. And I didn't know why, but I had the sudden, overwhelming feeling that whatever was outside had already been inside my apartment before. I never opened the door. But even now, years later, I still think about how quiet it was. And how close that breathing sounded. The apartment I was living in back then wasn't special. It was a small one-bedroom place on the second floor of an older building in Indiana. The kind of building that had been renovated just enough to look decent, but still had creaky floors and thin walls. I chose it because it was cheap and close to my job. At the time, I was working as an assistant manager at a local auto parts store. The hours were long, but the work was steady. I usually got home around 8:30 in the evening. That night was no different. I parked in the same spot I always did, walked up the stairs, and unlocked my door without noticing anything unusual. The hallway outside my apartment was narrow and poorly lit. Only every second light worked, so parts of it stayed in shadow. Most of the other tenants were older or worked night shifts, which meant the building was usually quiet after dark. I liked that. It felt predictable and safe. Inside, the apartment felt familiar. The couch sat against the far wall, the TV across from it. The kitchen was small, barely big enough for one person to stand in comfortably. My bedroom was at the end of a short hallway, with the bathroom right before it. Nothing fancy. Just a place to sleep and reset for the next day. It was early fall, and the evenings had started to cool down. I cracked a window in the living room and let the air in while I reheated leftovers from the night before. The smell of food filled the apartment, and for a while everything felt normal. Comfortably normal. I didn't have anyone staying with me.
No roommates. No pets.
My family lived in another state, and I hadn't planned on visiting for a few weeks. That night, I wasn't expecting any guests. I hadn't told anyone where I lived except my parents and a coworker. After eating, I sat on the couch and turned on the TV more for background noise than anything else. I scrolled through my phone, answering a couple of messages from work and checking the weather for the next day. It was supposed to rain overnight, but the forecast didn't mention anything severe. The building itself had a simple layout. 2 floors. 4 apartments on each floor. 1 main stairwell, and a side exit that most people never used. The front entrance locked automatically, but the mechanism was old. Sometimes it didn't latch right unless you pulled the door hard. One of my neighbors, an older man who lived across the hall, usually watched TV late into the night. I could sometimes hear it through the wall. That night, I didn't hear anything from his apartment.
No voices.
No television. Just quiet. Looking back, that quiet stands out the most. At the time, it didn't feel strange. It felt peaceful. I had no reason to believe that anything was wrong. After sitting on the couch for a while, I started to notice how quiet the apartment felt. The TV was still on, but the volume was low, and the sound didn't seem to fill the room like it usually did. Every small noise stood out more than it should have. I heard something come from the hallway outside my apartment. It sounded like a footstep. Just one. I paused the show and listened. The sound didn't repeat. The hallway went back to being completely silent. I told myself it was probably someone heading down the stairs or a door closing somewhere else in the building. A few minutes passed. I started watching again, but I couldn't focus. I kept glancing toward the front door, half expecting to see the handle move or a shadow pass under it. Nothing happened. Then I heard it again. This time it was closer. Not a footstep exactly, but the soft creak of the floorboards outside my door.
I knew those sounds well.
I had lived there long enough to recognize them. That particular creak only happened when someone stopped right in front of my apartment. I sat up straighter on the couch. I waited for the sound of keys. Or a knock. Or a door opening across the hall. None of that came. The creak faded, and the hallway went quiet again. I checked the time. It was just after 9:30 p.m. I got up and walked toward the kitchen, trying to act normal. As I passed the hallway mirror, I noticed the light above the front door was still off. I considered turning it on, then decided against it. I didn't want to draw attention to myself, for no reason. As I stood in the kitchen, I heard something else. A faint sound, almost like fabric brushing against the door. I froze and listened. My refrigerator hummed softly. The apartment felt still. The sound didn't come again, but the feeling it left behind stayed with me. A tight, uneasy feeling in my chest that I couldn't explain. I walked slowly back toward the living room and looked at the door. The lock looked the same as it always did. Nothing appeared damaged.
No scratches.
No movement. Still, I had the sense that I wasn't alone anymore. Not inside the apartment, but close. Too close. I tried to shake it off. I told myself I was tired. Work had been stressful, and my mind was probably filling in gaps that didn't matter. I turned the TV volume up slightly, hoping it would help me relax. Instead, it made the silence between sounds feel heavier. Then, from just outside the door, I heard a quiet exhale. It was soft, controlled, like someone trying not to be heard. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I stared at the door and waited for something to happen. Seconds passed. Then minutes. The sound didn't repeat, but I couldn't get rid of the feeling that someone was standing there listening the same way I was. That was when I realized something was wrong. Whatever was happening wasn't accidental. And it wasn't normal. After hearing the breathing outside the door, I stayed frozen on the couch. My eyes didn't leave the handle. I expected it to turn at any second. When it didn't, the waiting somehow felt worse. I slowly stood up and moved toward the hallway. I didn't turn on any lights. I didn't want whoever was outside to know exactly where I was. The TV continued playing behind me, its noise feeling strangely distant. I checked the lock again. That's when I noticed the deadbolt was turned slightly. Not fully unlocked. Not fully locked either. My stomach dropped. I was sure I had locked it earlier. I always did. I reached out and gently turned it until it clicked into place. The sound felt too loud in the quiet apartment. I pulled my hand back and listened. Nothing happened. For a few seconds, I thought maybe I had imagined the breathing. Maybe stress was getting to me. I took a step back, trying to calm myself down. Then the handle moved. It wasn't sudden or violent. It turned slowly, like the person on the other side was testing it. I stepped away from the door and felt my chest tighten. I realized then how exposed I was. The apartment had only one exit. The windows faced the street below, too high to climb out safely. I backed into the hallway and grabbed my phone from the table. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped it. I opened the emergency dial, but didn't press it yet. I was afraid the sound would give me away. Another sound came from the door. A light knock. Not loud. Not aggressive. 3 soft taps. I held my breath. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure it could be heard through the walls. The knock came again, just as gentle as before. Whoever was outside wasn't in a hurry. They were patient. The door handle turned again, harder this time. The door shook slightly in its frame. I heard a quiet grunt, like someone putting weight into it. I moved toward the bedroom, keeping my steps slow. I didn't want the floor to creak. As I reached the hallway, I heard the lock rattle again. This time, it sounded frustrated. I shut myself inside the bedroom and locked the door. It was a thin, cheap lock, but it was all I had. I backed into the corner near the bed and stared at the door, holding my phone tightly. Then I heard footsteps inside the apartment. Not outside anymore. Inside. Slow steps. Careful steps. They moved from the front door toward the living room. I heard something brush against the couch. The TV volume dropped suddenly, like someone had pressed a button. That was when panic really set in. I was no longer guessing if someone was there. They were inside with me, and they were getting closer. I stood frozen in the corner of my bedroom, staring at the door. My phone felt slick in my hand from sweat. I could hear my own breathing, loud and uneven, and I tried to slow it down. I didn't want to make a sound. The footsteps stopped outside my bedroom. For a moment, everything went quiet again. The kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. I wondered if the person had heard the bedroom door lock. I wondered if they were standing there listening the same way I had earlier. Then the bedroom door handle moved. It turned just enough to test it, then stopped. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep myself quiet. My legs felt weak, like they might give out at any second. I had never felt trapped like that before. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The handle turned again. Harder this time. The door shook once as the person pushed against it. The cheap lock held, but I knew it wouldn't take much. The frame creaked, and a thin line of light from the hallway appeared along the edge of the door. I backed farther into the corner and finally pressed the call button on my phone. I whispered to the dispatcher. I told him someone was inside my apartment. I gave the address as quietly as I could. My voice was shaking, but the dispatcher stayed calm and told me officers were on the way. While I was still on the line, the door slammed again.
Once. Twice.
Each hit felt closer, heavier. Then it stopped. I heard the person breathe on the other side of the door.
Slow.
Controlled. They spoke for the first time. Open the door. The voice was low and steady. Not angry. Not rushed. That scared me more than yelling would have. I didn't respond. I couldn't. The handle rattled violently now. The door bent inward slightly with a loud crack. I screamed without meaning to and dropped the phone. I grabbed the bedside table and shoved it in front of the door, even though I knew it wouldn't help much. Suddenly, the pressure stopped. I heard fast footsteps moving away from the bedroom. Drawers opening. Something falling to the floor. The sound of the front door handle shaking again. Then sirens. Faint at first, then louder. The noise inside the apartment stopped immediately. I heard the front door slam hard. I stayed in the corner, shaking, until the dispatcher told me it was safe to come out. When the police knocked and announced themselves, I almost didn't believe them. My legs barely held me as I opened the bedroom door. The apartment looked torn apart. Drawers were open. Couch cushions were moved. My front door lock was broken. The officers searched the place and the building. They didn't find anyone. But I knew one thing for sure. He had been close enough to touch me. And if the police had been a few minutes later, I don't think I would have made it out. The police stayed in my apartment for almost an hour. They checked every room, every closet, and even the space above the bathroom ceiling. One officer walked the hallway and the stairwell while another took my statement at the kitchen table. I tried to answer calmly, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. They told me there were no signs of forced entry on the front door. That didn't make sense to me. The lock was damaged. The door frame was cracked. One of the officers explained it quietly. The lock wasn't broken from the outside. It had been unlocked first, then forced later. As if the person inside already had access and didn't need to break in until things went wrong. That was the first detail that didn't sit right. While the officers continued searching, one of them asked if I had ever lost my keys. I told him no. I was careful with them. I always kept them in my pocket or on the counter by the door. He nodded but didn't look convinced. Before they left, they told me something else. Earlier that evening, another tenant had called in a complaint. Someone had been seen standing in the hallway on the second floor for a long time. Just standing there. Not knocking. Not moving. When the tenant looked again, the person was gone. The description matched what little I had seen. The next morning, I didn't go to work. I stayed in the apartment, sitting on the couch, trying to make sense of everything. That's when I noticed something missing. My spare key. I kept it in a small drawer near the kitchen, taped inside an envelope. I hadn't checked it in months. When I opened the drawer, the envelope was there, but it was empty. I felt cold all over. Later that day, the landlord came by after hearing what happened. I told him about the missing key. His face changed when I mentioned it. He hesitated before saying anything, then admitted something I wasn't supposed to know. The previous tenant had moved out suddenly. No notice.
No explanation.
A few weeks later, maintenance had reported strange things. Food trash in the building basement. Cigarette butts near the side exit. The landlord assumed it was kids or homeless people passing through. No one checked closely. The police came back that evening after I reported the missing key. They searched the basement again. This time, they found a makeshift sleeping area behind old storage shelves. A blanket, empty bottles, and a small bag with personal items inside, including a copy of my apartment key. The officer told me the man had likely been living in the building for some time, watching routines. learning schedules, waiting for the right moment. They never caught him. What changed everything for me was realizing the truth. He didn't break in that night. He already belonged there. He knew the building.
He knew my habits.
And he knew exactly when I was alone. That made it far worse than a random attack ever could be. I moved out of that apartment 2 weeks later. I didn't wait for the lease to end. I didn't argue about deposits. I packed only what I needed and left the rest behind. The landlord didn't try to stop me. He didn't ask questions either. For a while, I thought leaving would make the feeling go away. It didn't. In the new place, everything was brighter. New locks, new walls, more people around. On the surface, it felt safer. But at night, I still caught myself listening for sounds that weren't there. I checked the locks over and over. Sometimes I would wake up and sit in the dark, convinced I had heard someone breathing. The police followed up once. They told me there were no new leads.
No fingerprints.
No cameras in the building that night. The basement entrance hadn't shown signs of forced entry either. Whoever the man was, he knew how to stay unnoticed. That bothered me more than anything else. A few months after I moved, I got a call from my old neighbor, the older man across the hall. He told me the building had changed owners. Renovations were happening. People were in and out all day. During the cleanup, workers found something else. Behind a loose panel near the stairwell, there was a narrow gap between the walls. Inside, they found food wrappers, water bottles, and cigarette butts. There was also a small notebook. Most of the pages were blank. One page wasn't. It had dates written down.
Times.
And apartment numbers. Mine was circled. The police couldn't prove when it was written or who wrote it. They said it could have been from before or after the night I called them. They said there was no evidence the person ever came back. But they couldn't say he didn't. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about that breathing on the other side of the door. About how calm it sounded. About how close he must have been.
I don't know his name.
I don't know where he went. And I don't know how many times he stood outside my door before I noticed. What scares me most is this. If he could live inside that building for months without anyone realizing it, then he could be anywhere now. And sometimes, when I'm about to fall asleep, I get the same feeling I had that night. Like someone nearby knows exactly where I am. I moved out of that apartment 2 weeks later. I didn't tell many people where I was going. I didn't post anything online. I wanted to disappear quietly, the same way he seemed to. At first, the new place helped. The locks were solid. The building had cameras. I told myself it was over. Just a bad experience that I had survived. Something I could eventually forget. But forgetting turned out to be harder than leaving. Every night before going to bed, I checked the front door. Then I checked it again. Sometimes a third time. I made sure the deadbolt was turned fully. I pressed against the door to feel it resist. Only then could I lie down. Sleep didn't come easily. Small sounds woke me up. Pipes shifting. Someone walking outside. The elevator down the hall. Each time, my body reacted before my mind could catch up. My heart raced. My breathing slowed. I listened the same way I had that night, completely still, afraid that any movement would give me away. The police never called back with updates. The case stayed open, but inactive.
No suspect. No arrest.
No clear timeline of how long the man had been in the building. When I asked, one officer told me something I still think about. People like that don't need much, he said. They just need access. Months passed. Then one evening, I found something odd in my mailbox.
There was no stamp.
No return address. Just my name written in simple block letters. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It was blank. No message. No threat. Nothing I could show the police. They told me it could have been a mistake. Someone putting mail in the wrong box. They couldn't do anything about it. I threw the paper away, but the feeling stayed. What bothered me wasn't the envelope itself. It was how plain it was. How deliberate. Whoever dropped it knew where I lived. They didn't need to say anything. After that, I started noticing patterns. A car parked across the street too often. A man standing too long near the entrance of my building. Each time, I told myself I was being paranoid. That fear had rewired my brain. Still, I changed my routine. I left at different times, took different routes. I stopped sitting near windows at night. I never opened my door without checking the hallway first.
I didn't tell friends why.
A few weeks later, maintenance had reported strange things. Food trash in the building basement. Cigarette butts near the side exit. The landlord assumed it was kids or homeless people passing through. No one checked closely. The police came back that evening after I reported the missing key. They searched the basement again. This time, they found a makeshift sleeping area behind old storage shelves. A blanket, empty bottles, and a small bag with personal items inside, including a copy of my apartment key. The officer told me the man had likely been living in the building for some time, watching routines, learning schedules, waiting for the right moment. They never caught him. What changed everything for me was realizing the truth. He didn't break in that night. He already belonged there. He knew the building.
He knew my habits.
And he knew exactly when I was alone. That made it far worse than a random attack ever could be. I moved out of that apartment 2 weeks later. I didn't wait for the lease to end. I didn't argue about deposits. I packed only what I needed and left the rest behind. The landlord didn't try to stop me. He didn't ask questions either. For a while, I thought leaving would make the feeling go away. It didn't. In the new place, everything was brighter. New locks, new walls, more people around. On the surface, it felt safer. But at night, I still caught myself listening for sounds that weren't there. I checked the locks over and over. Sometimes I would wake up and sit in the dark, convinced I had heard someone breathing.